I knew the room would turn on me the moment the band cut to silence and all the crystal glasses caught the chandelier light like 1,000 judging eyes. It was the part of the reception where fathers say the soft things, about first steps and scraped knees and the kind of love that never quits. I rose anyway, toast in hand, and watched my daughter's new husband lean back in his chair like a man who already owned the furniture. He had that real estate showroom smile. His mother wore a smile too, sharper and more expensive, the kind that could cut paper and people. They had chosen a riverside hall with arched windows and rented magnolias. Linen napkins, monogrammed menus, a champagne tower trembling on a mirrored table. It was April, but the night felt like January. Cold slipping through the glass no matter how high they cranked the heat. Claire glanced at me with a small, private plea. "Dad, please be good." Her dress made her look like the memory of her mother I still carry in my ribs. I nodded to tell her I would try. "Good evening," I said into the mic, and heard my voice echo once off the crown molding. "I'm Philip, Claire's father. Thank you for celebrating our family." A tide of polite smiles. Forks stilled. Even the waiters paused at the threshold, plates balanced on hands like scales. I told a story about Claire learning to ride a bike by the river, the way she refused training wheels because, at 8, she'd already decided she'd rather crash than be coddled. People laughed in the right places. But behind the laughter, Edward traded a glance with his mother. He tapped a gold watch with one finger, the universal signal for "wrap it up, old man." Catherine dabbed at the corner of her mouth with a napkin she hadn't used, then angled her face so the diamond at her ear could be seen from 3 tables away. I lifted my glass. "To my daughter," I said, and let the words sit. "May your marriage be a ledger that always balances. Trust in, trust out. No hidden fees. No unspoken terms." A ripple moved through the room, the way wind moves tall grass. You could almost hear it. Terms. Edward gave a tight smile. The DJ shifted his weight behind the booth. Somebody whispered prenup. Somewhere near the bar, a cousin of his laughed too loud, then pretended it was about the cake. I took a breath and made it sound like a joke, but not a joke. "My father," Claire's granddad, "taught us 3 rules. Don't brag, don't rush, and don't sign anything when your hands are shaking." That got a softer laugh, the kind that says, "We're fine. Keep it light." I set my glass down. "Here's to hands that stay steady," I added, and saw Catherine's smile falter by a millimeter. "To a life that never needs fine print." Claire mouthed thank you. The band swelled back in, the safe song, the one even the shy uncles knew. I sat, knuckles cooled by the linen, and told myself I'd done the fatherly thing without drawing any blood. That lasted about a minute and a half. Edward's colleagues clustered by the espresso cart with their ties loose and their secrets looser. "Closed 2 this week," one said, pitching his voice just high enough to carry. "After tonight we can lock down the rest." Lock down. His eyes slid to me, then to Edward, who smirked like the punchline had already paid out. Catherine drifted over, scent of white flowers and strategy. "Philip," she said, each consonant polished. That was quaint. She tilted her head, taking in my off-the-rack suit the way appraisers take in a house they've already decided to undervalue. "I imagine you must be relieved. Stability suits your family." "Stability suits every family," I said, and pretended not to hear the quick, mossy laugh that came from somewhere behind her. "Indeed, which is why we have certain safeguards in place." She sipped her champagne. "Young people don't always appreciate structure. This fortunate Edward does. He's organized. And fond of schedules," Edward added, appearing at her elbow, clapping my shoulder too hard. "Speaking of which, speeches need to stay on schedule." To the room. "You hear that? No more surprise terms." Laughter, but it faltered when I didn't join. I looked at Claire. She was talking to a flower girl, pinning a stray curl behind the child's ear with a tenderness that would kill me if I let it. When she looked up, I gave her the kind of smile you give someone on a cliff ledge. Steady, slow, nothing sudden. The photographer, kid in thrift store brogues and an eye for gossip, caught Catherine leaning toward a cousin and whispering, "We'll make sure the paperwork covers the assets. Just in case her side's minimal." The camera clicked. He never knew he'd taken something worth more than any centerpiece in the room. Between courses, the band played a waltz and couples drifted out like leaves on a calm current. I stood near the window to watch the river turn black and glassy. In that reflection, the room looked richer and emptier at once. Edward joined me, hands in pockets. "Good crowd," he said. "Connections are everything. You'd be amazed what doors open when you marry correctly." He said marry like a choir. "Catherine's already introduced Claire to a financial planner we trust. Consolidation is key. One family, one plan." "One plan," I repeated. "Whose plan?" He smiled. "Our plan. Family plan." He paused just long enough to let the phrase hang where my daughter's name should be. Then he leaned closer. "You don't have to worry about a thing, Philip. We'll take care of Claire. And you." He glanced at my watch, "Not gold. Streamline. That's the word." "Streamline," I said, studying his reflection instead of his face. "Another word for cut." He laughed, not realizing he'd already said too much. When the cake came, tall and sugared within an inch of its life, the toasts loosened and so did tongues. One of Edward's friends, the one with the cufflinks shaped like dollar signs, too on the nose to be fiction, hoisted his glass and announced, "To marrying up, financially, morally, everything." The table roared. "And to the next big acquisition." He still thought he was talking about real estate. Claire flushed but smiled like people do when they're choosing grace over pride. I wanted to drag her out by the hand and drive until the river turned into a lake her mother loved. Instead, I swallowed something bitter and felt it set like concrete. When the garter toss happened, loud, ridiculous, and too intimate by half, Edward snapped the elastic like a showman and sent it arcing toward the same cluster of men. One of them shouted, "Put me down for a wager on the bonus coming soon." Edward winked. "Already penciled." I watched the magnolias tremble in the draft from the AC and thought about ledgers. About my father's notebook with its neat columns and quiet millions. About vaults that stay shut. As dessert plates were cleared, the planner in a headset hustled us toward a final round of photos. Catherine corralled relatives like a general calling formations. "Immediate family in front," she said then, as if she were doing me a favor. "Philip, you too." I stepped onto the riser beside Claire. She squeezed my fingers once, 3 taps for "I'm okay." The code we used when she was small and had to face a stage or a dentist. I gave 3 back. Edward slid in on the other side, and the photographer told us to hold still. The flash popped. Another angle. Another pop. On the third, Edward leaned just close enough for me to hear him over the shutter. "We'll get the signatures sorted this week," he murmured. "Bank's close at 5. Don't be late." I didn't move. "What signatures?" "Consolidation," he said, smiling for the camera. "Streamline." Click. "Some things," I said, smiling too, "are safer unsaid." He turned his head a fraction. "Not to family." "To family?" I echoed, and finally turned my face to the lens. The photographer lowered his camera. "Perfect," he said. "That one felt loaded." "Doesn't everything tonight?" I asked. He laughed, not sure if I meant it. The band struck up the last song. People swarmed the dance floor for the big, sloppy group moment everyone pretends to love. I stayed at the edge, counting faces, measuring distances, mapping exits the way I used to map routes through factory floors humming with machines. Old habits. Old engineer. A man who knows where the stress points are and how much weight a beam can carry before it fails. Catherine brushed past me on her way to the DJ. "Play something modern," she hissed, then caught herself and turned sugary again. "Philip, do relax. Tonight is about joy." She leaned close enough that I felt her breath. "Next week, we handle the boring business. It's all quite standard." I watched her glide away, all satin and certainty, and realized my hands were steady. Steadier than they'd been when I stood up to toast. The room spun around the dance floor. The champagne tower quivered. Claire's laugh flew to the rafters and caught there like a ribbon. I slipped my phone from my pocket and typed a note I'd already drafted in my head. Monday, 9 a.m. Call Elena about trust structure. Then I added a line I hadn't planned to add until the honeymoon was over. Begin the test. Confirm who's willing to sign what. Across the room, Edward lifted Claire's hand and spun her, flashing that showroom grin, already measuring where the walls would go once the place was his. I pictured a ledger, clean and white and waiting. I pictured a pen that only writes in permanent ink. When the song ended, the crowd cheered and the lights brightened just a notch, enough to wash the corners in a winter kind of blue. I caught Edward's eye and raised my glass. Once more, like a man toasting the future. He raised his back like a man saluting a deal. If he'd watched my mouth carefully, he might have read the words I didn't say. No hidden fees. If he'd watched my hands, he might have noticed they weren't shaking at all. The morning after the wedding smelled of wet flowers and burnt coffee. The house was silent except for the ticking clock that had belonged to Claire's mother. I sat by the window, tie still hanging from last night's collar, replaying the sound of Edward's voice saying, signatures. A single word, but loaded like a gun left on the table. I checked my phone. 2 missed calls from an unknown number, 1 voicemail. Catherine's voice poured through, low and smooth. Philip, dear, Edward will send a notary by the end of the week. Just a few formalities to ensure Claire's security. You'll want to cooperate. Then a pause. Trust me. It's easier that way. The coffee tasted like ash after that. 3 days later, I got home from the grocery store to find a sleek black sedan parked in front of my gate. A man in a suit stepped out, carrying a briefcase and an air of entitlement. Behind him was Edward, pretending this was just another casual visit. Morning, Philip, he called, voice dripping false warmth. This'll only take a minute. The man flipped open a folder, revealing pages dense with legal text and tiny numbers. It's just a standard consolidation form, he said, for inheritance planning. Catherine insisted we make sure Claire's protected. I skimmed the first paragraph and felt my pulse spike. Granting joint control of assets to the marital household. They'd written household, not couple. That word meant one thing. Catherine would have her claws in it too. I shut the folder slowly. You expect me to sign this today? Edward smiled the way sharks smile, lips, no eyes. It's a formality. Everyone does it. You wouldn't want to delay your daughter's new life, right? I looked past him to the sidewalk where Clare was climbing out of her car. She looked radiant, hopeful, the kind of glow you see in someone who still believes everything will work out. She waved. I waved back. Leave it here, I said. I'll review it with my attorney. Edward's jaw tightened. We don't need to make this complicated. Then you don't need my signature. For a moment his mask slipped. The notary shifted awkwardly beside him, glancing at the sky. Edward leaned in just enough for me to smell his cologne. Something synthetic and smug. You can either be part of this family, Philip, or the problem we fix. I smiled, small and steady. I'm an engineer. I like fixing things. He turned on his heel and stalked off, the notary scrambling to follow. Clare waved goodbye again, confused but smiling. I waited until their car disappeared, then went inside and opened my desk drawer. Inside was the leather folder that held my father's will and the bank documents. $9 million in trust funds, property notes, and investment accounts. None of it in Claire's name yet. I ran a hand over the embossed letters. Estate of Henry Vargas. My father's handwriting still marked the margins of one page. Protect your blood, but never feed the wolves. That night, I drove to a downtown branch and rented a second safe deposit box under a separate trust name, the Vargas Education Fund. I moved the entire inheritance there. The original papers in my desk were now worthless copies. A decoy should anyone come snooping. 2 weeks passed. I tried to stay polite to give Claire space. But every time she visited, Edward was there. Fixing things that weren't broken, checking the mailbox like he lived there, complimenting the house while measuring its value with his eyes. Then came February, a gray month that made the city look like it had forgotten how to breathe. Claire called one evening, her voice bright but thin. Dad, we're thinking about buying a house closer to downtown. Edward says it's a smart investment. He even found a notary who can rush the documents. My stomach turned. A notary named Lopez? She hesitated. How did you? I read the fine print. Dad, please, don't start again. Just promise me one thing, Claire. Don't sign anything without letting me see it first. She sighed. I'll think about it. She didn't. By March, I barely recognized her voice. The excitement had gone flat, replaced by quick texts and canceled dinners. When I finally called her, she sounded far away. Edward's been stressed. Deals fell through. Catherine says we just have to push through. I could hear her trying to convince herself. 2 weeks later, a storm rolled in from the coast. One of those early spring tempests that rattle windows and clean nothing. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. Claire. Her voice cracked through static and rain. Dad, please come get me. I can't stay here. The words pulled me from bed before she finished the sentence. 15 minutes later, I pulled up in front of their new dream house. A rental with white siding and too many locks. The porch light flickered over her face, pale and wet. 2 suitcases sat beside her. The front door stood slightly open, the kind of open that means I left before they could stop me. She climbed in, shaking. They're gone. Probably with his mother. I found papers, Dad. Divorce drafts, property transfers, and texts. He was going to use my signature from the prenup to move money. I put the car in gear. We're going home. Halfway there, she started crying again. You were right. He's been cheating. I saw messages with one of his coworkers. He laughed when I confronted him. Said the marriage was a strategic phase. He even mentioned Grandpa's money. How did he know about that? He doesn't, I said quickly. He's guessing. Keep talking. He said Catherine already contacted someone about the estate. Dad, did Grandpa? Did he leave something? I gripped the wheel. He left us lessons. That's all you need to know for now. The rain came down harder, wipers smearing it into silver streaks. Claire wiped her face with her sleeve, shaking her head. He said they'd ruin me if I left, that they'd take everything I had. I thought I was marrying love, but I married leverage. I pulled into our driveway, lights glowing warm behind rain-blurred glass. You have something they can't take, Claire. What? Your story, I said, and mine, and we're not finished writing it. We unloaded her suitcases in silence. The air smelled of wet asphalt and betrayal. I poured her tea and watched her hands tremble around the cup. I'm so sorry, Dad, she whispered. You warned me. I didn't listen. I sat across from her, voice steady. You wanted to believe the best in someone. That's not weakness. That's faith. The problem is you gave it to a man who saw faith as paperwork. She tried to smile, but her lips quivered. Outside, a car engine roared down the street and slowed near our house. Headlights swept across the window. Edward's sedan. He stopped, door slamming hard enough to echo. Claire froze. Dad! I stood, already moving. Stay here. The rain had stopped, but the air still crackled with it. Edward marched up the path, eyes blazing. Where is she? She's safe, I said, stepping onto the porch. Go home. You think you can hide her? He sneered. You're just delaying the inevitable. Catherine's talking to lawyers. We know you're holding something back, some fund, some money. You're not fooling anyone. I smiled slowly. You're right. I am holding something. He smirked, misreading the tone. Good, because we'll get it in discovery. And when we do, you'll find it's not yours to touch. He stepped closer, face inches from mine. Old men shouldn't play games they can't finish. Then you shouldn't pick fights you can't win. Behind me, Claire's voice shook but firmed up halfway through. Edward, leave. He turned toward her, voice dripping poison. You really think this changes anything? You walked out. That's abandonment. You'll see what the court does with that. I took a step forward, forcing him to back down. I'll see the court before you do. Now leave my property. His jaw flexed, rain running down his temples. This isn't over. He stalked back to the car, tires spitting gravel as he sped off into the night. I stood there for a long time, the smell of ozone and engine exhaust heavy in the air. Then I went inside and locked the door. Claire sat at the table, clutching her cup. "He's going to come after us." "Let him," I said. "He's walking straight into his own trap." She frowned. "What trap?" I glanced toward my study, where the fake inheritance folder waited in its drawer. The one I built the moment he smiled at our wedding. Outside, thunder rolled again, softer this time, like applause heard through a wall. By morning, the storm had passed, but its echo lingered in every creak of the house. The streets outside were slick, reflecting the pale gray of an early spring sun. Claire slept on the couch, wrapped in one of her mother's old blankets. Her tea had gone cold beside her hand, and I envied the stillness on her face. I hadn't slept at all. At 7:15 a.m., I called Jim Walker, an old friend, semi-retired lawyer, the kind of man who still believed that truth had paperwork to back it up. He answered on the third ring. "Phil, you sound like you haven't slept in a week," he said. "Try a month," I replied. "I need to talk. Divorce case. Ugly one. Come by. 10 o'clock. Bring whatever you've got." When Claire woke, she looked disoriented, as if her dreams had been halfway between guilt and grief. "Did he call?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "Not yet, but he will. And when he does, we'll be ready." Over breakfast, she barely touched her toast. "Dad, I keep thinking, if I'd listened to you, maybe." "Stop," I cut in. "We can't rewrite the past. We can only control what happens next." I opened a small fireproof box on the table and began laying out documents. Her marriage license, copies of the prenup, the text she'd screenshotted, and the printout of the voicemail Catherine had left. "These are our opening cards," I said. "And now, we find out what hand they're hiding." She frowned. "Do you really think they forged something?" "I think they planned to. Which is worse." We drove downtown through thin sheets of drizzle, the kind that never quite stops. Jim's office was wedged between a pawn shop and a tax service, the same spot it had been for 20 years. The sign still read Walker and Associates, though there hadn't been associates in a decade. Jim met us with coffee and a frown. "All right," he said, flipping through the papers. "You've got infidelity, coercion, and potential fraud. That's a trifecta of leverage if we can prove it." The key word being prove. He glanced at Claire. "You have anything tangible on the cheating?" She hesitated, then handed him a stack of printed text messages. "These, and a photo of him with her. I followed him once." Jim nodded. "Good. We'll include that. As for fraud, we'll subpoena any property records if they try to claim assets that don't exist." "You mentioned a notary?" "Name's Lopez," I said. "I think he's involved in something bigger. He notarized documents before he was licensed." Jim's eyebrows lifted. "That's perjury territory. Let me make a call." He dialed a number, spoke quietly, scribbled something on a legal pad, then looked up. "We'll start with an emergency filing for separation. We'll freeze any joint assets before they move them." Claire exhaled shakily. "He'll hate that." "Good," Jim said dryly. "Angry people make mistakes." I liked that line. I planned to remember it. That afternoon, I bought a small voice recorder and set it on my kitchen counter. I'd used one just like it years ago on factory floor inspections, quiet, reliable, and invisible in plain sight. Old habits have their uses. Sure enough, Edward called at 6:42 p.m. "Philip," he began, his voice honeyed and poisonous. "We could have handled this privately." "There's still time," I said, letting the silence stretch. "Then withdraw the petition. Sign the documents I gave you. Catherine's friends can make this go away." "I'm not signing anything." His tone hardened. "You think this is about you?" "It's about Claire. She's unstable. I've got colleagues willing to testify to her erratic behavior. You'll look like a senile old man letting your daughter ruin herself." I looked at the recorder's tiny red light, glowing steady. "You done?" "No," he snapped. "I'll bury you in court. You'll lose your house, your pension, everything." "See you there," I said, and hung up. When I replayed the recording, it was perfect, Clear, emotional, incriminating. I saved it to 3 drives and hid one in my workshop toolbox. Claire listened to it that night, jaw tightening. "He's trying to paint me as unstable," she said. "That's Catherine talking through him. She always was the puppeteer," I muttered. "Let's cut her strings." 2 days later, the retaliation began. Neighbors suddenly stopped waving. A coworker of Claire's texted her awkwardly, "Hey, is it true you ran off? Someone said Edward caught you with another guy." The rumor had found legs. That night, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Ortiz from next door stood on the porch, holding a casserole dish like a peace offering. "Philip, dear," she said quietly, "I heard Catherine's been talking, saying terrible things, that Claire left her husband without cause. I don't believe it, but people are starting to." "Thank you for telling us," I said, taking the dish. "We'll handle it." Inside, Claire paced. "They're smearing me before the hearing. What do we do?" "We change the narrative," I said. "They want rumors. We'll give them evidence." I called Jim again. "File harassment. And contact that private investigator you mentioned, the ex-cop. Reyes." Jim said. "Good man. Doesn't come cheap." "Neither do mistakes," I replied. Reyes met me the next morning at a diner near the courthouse. He was in his late 50s, with a boxer's build and eyes that had seen every kind of lie. "Walker told me you're sitting on something sensitive," he said. "Talk." I slid the recorder across the booth and pressed play. Edward's threats filled the air between us. Reyes nodded slowly. "Classic coercion. I can dig into his financials, track calls, maybe pull license records for that notary. But it'll cost." "How much?" "20 grand up front." I didn't blink. "Done." He smirked. "You must really hate this guy." "I don't waste hate," I said. "I invest it." He chuckled. "I like you, Vargas. You think like a detective. Or a man who's already planning the second half of the story." The next week blurred into motion. Phone calls, documents, and sleepless nights. Claire started therapy to build a record of emotional distress, a move Jim insisted on for credibility. I spent my days triple-checking files and nights staring at the glowing clock, waiting for the next blow. Then one afternoon, Reyes called. "Got something you'll want to see," he said. "Meet me at the park near City Hall." Under a bench shaded by sycamores, he handed me a manila envelope. Inside, photos, transaction slips, timestamp screenshots. Edward and Lopez meeting in a coffee shop. Catherine sliding a thin envelope across the table. Cash withdrawal records from her account matching the same day. Reyes whistled softly. They paid him to backdate a property transfer. Before the wedding. I stared at the pictures, each one hammering another nail into their coffin. "You can testify?" "If needed. But it'll be stronger if they hang themselves first." "They will," I said. "They can't help it." That night, Claire came home from work pale. "Dad, you need to see this." She handed me her phone. A message from an unknown number. "Tell your father to back off. We know about the inheritance." I smiled faintly. Good. That means they're getting desperate. Desperate how? They're threatening us. They just confirmed they believe the inheritance exists. That's all we needed. Her confusion turned to realization. "So now what?" "Now," I said, turning toward my study. "We set the trap." I opened the drawer, pulled out the fake folder labeled Estate of Henry Vargas, and set it on the table under the lamplight. "This," I said, tapping it, "is what they'll find." Claire's eyes widened. "What's in it?" "Enough to make them confess," I said. "And not a cent more." Outside, rain started again. Light, steady, and patient. The kind of rain that cleans but never forgets. By early April, the war had gone quiet, but quiet doesn't mean safe. Quiet is just the inhale before an explosion. Reyes kept feeding me pieces of the puzzle. Recordings, wire transfers, even a blurred photo of Catherine at a downtown law office handing over a sealed envelope. "She's moving fast," he said. "If she can't get the inheritance, she's going for damage control. Probably bribing someone to fabricate a new document." Good. Let her. The deeper she dug, the clearer the trail would become. Claire, meanwhile, was finding her strength again. The first few weeks she'd moved through the house like a ghost, apologizing for every noise, every broken plate. But now she spoke with precision, almost like me, short sentences, no wasted words. She started helping me archive evidence, labeling each file with dates and cross-references. For court, she'd said, and for my sanity. One night, as we sat among piles of folders, she looked up from her laptop. "Dad," she asked, "what if they actually find the real papers someday? The inheritance, I mean." I closed the folder in my hand, the one marked Lopez meetings/cash trail. "Then they'll find a wall of lawyers between them and every cent. I'm not hiding it out of greed, Claire. I'm protecting it, like your grandfather wanted." Her expression softened. "I just wish we could stop fighting and go back to normal." I smiled faintly. "Normal's a luxury, sweetheart. We'll earn it back once we finish this." 2 mornings later, Jim called me from his office, voice clipped. "They filed their response," he said. "Edward's claiming you manipulated Claire, emotional abuse, alienation, even financial control. He's painting her as unstable and you as overbearing." I laughed. Projection suits him. "Yeah, but here's the kicker. They attached a notarized transfer agreement, allegedly signed by Claire and witnessed by Lopez, dated 2 weeks before the wedding. It says she granted Edward partial claim to family assets for financial security." My jaw tightened. "Forgery. Definitely. But we'll need to prove it in front of a judge." "You still have that investigator's material?" "All of it." "Good. Bring it. And, Phil, brace yourself. They're playing dirty." That evening, while I sorted through the photos, the phone rang again. Private number. I answered and let the silence draw out. Then a voice, calm and venomous. "You're clever, Philip, but you can't hide the money forever." "Catherine," I said, "I admire your restraint. Most men would have spent it by now. But tell me, how does it feel? Sitting on a fortune you'll never enjoy." "I enjoy it every time someone like you fails to steal it." Her tone sharpened. "Do you really think you can win in court? Judges like results. We can afford them." "You can afford lawyers," I replied. "But you can't afford the truth once it's public." A pause. Then she chuckled softly. "You sound just like Henry, arrogant to the end. You know, your father once approached my husband about an investment deal 20 years ago. Small world, isn't it?" That froze me for half a second, just long enough for her to notice. "Oh," she purred. "You didn't know? Maybe Edward and I aren't the only ones who did our homework." The line clicked dead. I stared at the receiver, her words echoing. My father? Involved with her husband? No. Henry Vargas had been private, cautious. But still, a seed of doubt planted itself in my chest. When I told Claire, she frowned. "Do you think it's true?" "Probably not. But lies only work when they sound like memory." She squeezed my hand. "Then we remind them what real memory looks like." April 12th. The preliminary hearing. The courthouse smelled like old varnish and rain. Claire's palms were cold, so I covered them with mine. Across the aisle, Edward sat too comfortably, like a man who thought the ending was already written. Catherine perched beside him, pearl earrings glowing under the fluorescent light. Jim leaned toward me. "We'll open with the forgery. Let them choke on their own document first." The bailiff called the case. The judge, a stern woman with tired eyes, sat high above, flipping through the file. "I understand there's a dispute regarding alleged asset transfers?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jim said smoothly. "My client's daughter is accused of signing a financial document that did not, in fact, exist until after the marriage. We have evidence suggesting perjury, bribery, and falsification of records." The opposing lawyer, a slick man named Ferris, smirked. "Strong words, counselor. But what you call forgery, we call prudence. My client simply ensured his financial stability. Love and security go hand in hand." "Interesting definition of love," Jim muttered. The judge raised a brow. "Let's see the document." Ferris produced the paper, sliding it forward. Lopez's signature gleamed at the bottom. Jim didn't touch it. He gestured to me instead. Mr. Vargas, would you confirm the date on that document? I leaned forward. March 3rd, 2024. I read aloud. 2 weeks before the wedding. And would you confirm the notary listed? Carlos Lopez. Jim smiled faintly. Your Honor. Mr. Lopez did not obtain his license until March 17th. 2 weeks after this document was allegedly signed. Ferris blinked, mask slipping. That's impossible. Jim held up a certified copy from the Secretary of State's office. File date March 17th. Clear as day. The judge leaned back. So, Counselor, your document is notarized by someone who wasn't legally authorized to notarize anything at that time? Ferris stammered. There must be a clerical error. Jim shook his head. We anticipated that argument. We also have video evidence of Mr. Lopez meeting with the defendants days before the supposed notarization. He motioned toward the screen as the bailiff dimmed the lights. Rhea's footage flickered to life. Edward handing over an envelope. Catherine sliding cash across the table. Lopez taking it with a nervous glance around. The room went dead quiet except for the whir of the projector fan. Your Honor, Jim said. That's bribery and falsification. Both felonies. Ferris jumped up. Objection. This video was obtained without consent. Correction, Jim countered. It was recorded in a public place. Perfectly legal. The judge tapped her pen, unimpressed. Objection overruled. She turned to the defendants. Mr. Harlan, Mrs. Harlan, would you like to explain why your signatures appear on an invalid document? Edward's face had gone pale. It's a misunderstanding. Lopez must have perjured himself? The judge interrupted. Convenient. Catherine stood abruptly, composure cracking. We were protecting our family. That man, she pointed at me, has been hoarding wealth while pretending to be poor. He manipulated everyone. The judge's voice turned icy. We're not here to discuss emotions, Mrs. Harlan. We're here to discuss evidence. Jim seized the moment. Speaking of evidence, we have more bank statements linking Catherine's account to the payment scene in the video. He handed up the documents, neat as a blade. Ferris muttered something about contesting the chain of custody, but the judge had stopped listening. She read for a long moment, then set the pages down. I'll be forwarding this to the district attorney's office. The court will also freeze all disputed assets until criminal review is complete. Edward slumped, shoulders heavy. Catherine pressed a trembling hand to her pearls, realizing they'd just turned into shackles. Clare exhaled beside me, tears threatening but defiant. I looked at her and whispered, Rule number 3. She smiled through the tears. Never sign with shaking hands. When the gavel finally struck, it sounded like the closing of a vault. Outside, the air smelled of freedom and wet pavement. Reporters shouted questions, flashes popping, but Clare ignored them. She walked straight down the courthouse steps into the sunlight. Dad, she said, turning to me. How did you know all this would happen? I gave a small shrug. I didn't. I just prepared for the worst and prayed for the proof. She smiled faintly. Grandpa would have been proud. I nodded. He still is. We got in the car and drove away. The city fading behind us, replaced by open sky and quiet. In my briefcase, the real inheritance documents waited, untouched, unmentioned. The wolves had bitten into a decoy, and the real feast stayed hidden, for now. Because the moment Catherine mentioned my father's old investment, I knew something she didn't. There was one asset my father never listed publicly, and if she was hunting for it, maybe someone else was too. But that would be another story. For now, I reached over, squeezed my daughter's hand, and said, Let's go home. The road ahead shimmered under the April sun, clean and wide open, like a life reclaimed.